Today we'll mostly touch on the quality engineering model that we are implementing at MillenniumIT. Well, it's not implementing in the sense it's not something new, but it's something that's been in the works for a while, but have been like put in high gear with the new clearing and settlement and risk platform that we are building. So the phrase quality at source, it's taken and adapted from the manufacturing industry, as like some of you might be familiar with. And we've used the source connotation to drive our quality initiative. So given like whatever software that you write is as good as the quality of the source code you have underneath. So there was no better place to start, really. So moving on. So some of the traits that Chris already like put up earlier when he put MillenniumIT on the introduction. It's some of the traits of the systems we are delivering. So they're highly available. So touching on availability numbers of network software itself. Very tough latency SLAs in micro to milliseconds from trading to clearing. Thousands of transactions per second. Like throughputs we are supporting hitting tens of thousands when it comes to clearing, and even hundreds of thousands when it comes to trading. And the correctness in terms of volumes, trillions worth of value in clearing to very high accuracy, going down to 6 decimal places, and executing complex business logic and complex calculations, especially in the clearing side with risk coming in. So given all this complexity and given our systems run for decades, so it's when the problem is put forward, I've tried to put the problem in a sentence and try to see like how complicated the problem is. So we are validating functional correctness at high throughput, having low latency, and systems running for decades with high availability. So it's a pretty big, complicated problem to have, and given the number of trials that the systems go through, it's impossible ever to cover all possible fault permutations. So it's the problem of, say, getting peaceful sleep at night, as Chris put it earlier. So it's a problem that's much closer to home. The motivation is there to make sure the software that we deliver doesn't keep us awake at night. So in addition to the complexities and the number of years we support a given product, so we are running our systems in over 40 countries throughout. So if there's anything that can go wrong, it will go wrong somewhere. So building products that are robust from ground up, that's like the only solutions we've figured so far. So as many of you would have figured, that there's no silver bullet other than having a robust process, frameworks in place to identify faults early, prevent faults in the first place, or detect as early as possible. So the cost of a defect, that curve that goes exponentially higher as time passes, we try to like keep as many defects as possible detected early. So I'll try to go through the process that we have put in place. So, so this is a process that we are putting in place mainly on the CCP side and risk, but it's something that's gradually being implemented throughout Millennium. So essentially what we've done here is put a process in place where we have frameworks as to how we operate in each phase of the development cycle. So requirement specification to design, development, and test. And a bunch of guidelines to be followed. And at the end, a review process to make sure that we are doing the right thing, as well as to keep our frameworks and guidelines honest and get that feedback in and keep on continuously improving. So the frameworks in place gives us structure and reuse as much as possible, and guidelines drive the patterns, the good practices that we want to follow. And again, like the feedback loop in the review process, make sure we stick to, we keep on improving our process, and the quality of the process keeps on improving. So to make sure that we do this right, we use many tools as appropriate. So there's no way that people can just make sure at every stage we do the right thing, but have quite a number of tools in place and a number of metrics that we continuously look at to drive improvement. So if I just take like one stage in this process, just development. So we have frameworks in place that describe how we go about writing code, how we structure our code, for example, in order for the code to be robust, performant. And then there's actual software frameworks built on top of the Millennium tech stack that actually enforces some of the patterns that we want to reuse. And guidelines, a bunch of guidelines in place to make sure we actually follow those patterns as prescribed. And in the development case, with the code review process, make sure like we adhere to these guidelines in coding, usage of different frameworks, and feed any findings back to the framework and guidelines and keep on improving the process. So I'll try to like touch on in a bit of detail on the code review and the design review processes. So one principle we are putting in place, we put in place for CCP and risk, is to make sure each line of code that we deliver runs through a design review, a code review, and a test review. So it's a bit of a hard and fast rule to make sure that it happens. It's a lot of pain to enforce, but once you get the process established, it makes the developer's life as well as the tester's life much easier, given that the rework that we end up doing is much less compared to what we are used to. So again, the philosophy is to prevent defects in the first place by doing all the reviews up front and designing to a much more detailed level than we would normally do. And on the second case, have enough feedback loops, very tight feedback loops implemented using continuous integration to give us feedback very close to the from the point of build to point of say nightly test. So there are multiple levels of testing that we do, so which I'll touch on later. And there's a bunch of static code analysis tools we use, dynamic code analysis we use, which again gives feedback through continuous integration. every night. So every morning, the developer turns up to work, previous day's check-in, and its quality is right there on his screen to see and react to. And we also monitor code coverage, especially on unit tests. So every check-in that goes in goes through a coverage run, and everyone would have the visibility as to how the coverage is trending, and has the chance to fix and make sure that we are always on the upward trend. So when it comes to testing, the philosophy there is the closer the test to code or source code, the more useful the test is. So that comes from the tests that are like closer to the source code itself, unit tests being reliable, easier to maintain, and they're quite fast as well. So we try to make as many tests done at a unit test level where we are not trying to verify something with the integration. So we do a lot of unit tests, and we do end-to-end tests to validate that what we deliver is what's expected of the product. But we brought in a layer in the middle that we call component test, which kind of goes closely with the API tests that everyone's used to. So in testing libraries, we do API tests. So that falls into the component layer here. But in addition, given that our systems are distributed, running in multiple machines, putting up a single test environment is quite costly. So one thing we've done here is build up a test framework that tests each component or each process of the distributed system, take it in isolation, and test the contract that that process has with the surrounding, as well as all the NFRs, the operation level agreements that we've set on these processes in isolation. Of course, we do the same, or not the same, but at a higher level, we do similar testing at end-to-end level. But having these multiple layers makes it easy for us to isolate defects at the development phase. So when we see a defect, by running different sets of tests, we have the chance to isolate and figure out, okay, this is where the defect should lie. Especially in performance testing, that becomes a real help. So in unit tests, we cover functional bits, non-functional in terms of perf at the lowest level, because we work with low latencies. There are data structures that we write on our own. So the perf test for a given data structure would end up being at a unit test level, which gives us the isolation and prevents any perf hitting defect moving on to the next levels. So we have perf tests at component level and end-to-end level as well. But having multiple layers will again help us isolate defects quite early in the cycle. So in terms of validating the requirement that we build software that actually fulfills the expectation of the client, we are using behavior-driven development, so this has been around for a while now. We are putting in BDD and a domain-specific language of our own that describes the behavior in a easy-to-read manner. You look at the test case and you identify exactly what we are testing. So this is the executable specs that Joseph was talking about as well. So we work in an agile environment. We bring in user stories into a sprint, and a user story is groomed, then detail level planned, and when we bring a user story into the sprint, the user story comes with a bunch of acceptance criteria that's written like this, which are executable by themselves. But it's a bit tricky to make it executable always, because you always need to add new features into the test framework to make sure this is executable. So making the DSL in itself readable and reusable, that's a challenge always, and that's something we're trying to stick to as much as possible. So this is more of a like traditional methodologies that people have been using for a while in software industry. And I've spoken about frameworks that we use. There are like few frameworks, few concepts that we've taken on from related industries as well. So one such is fault modeling. So fault modeling is something that comes from electronics in circuitry. It's fault modeling frameworks help you discover potential faults up early. So you have to have a framework in place to figure out faults at the requirement stage, the design stage, and the development phase. And then put in a framework to address those possible faults. So that's a practice we are following. And in a specific case, when it comes to privacy and preventing information disclosure, so one of the fault containment schemes we've put in place called tiered containment. So the idea behind this is having multiple layers of auditors checking on data that we actually share out with the client that goes out of the system. So the theory behind it being you need to have 2 or more consecutive bugs in place before an information disclosure breach happens. And one other concept that we are trying out from the networking equipment side is a concept called active monitoring, where we are trying to probe our system on system endpoints. In production, the capability is there to make sure that we can stimulate the system in different endpoints using different inputs and listen to feedback. So this is, again, tricky. Like you have to keep this probing and the data that the probes hit segregated from the actual data in the system. And to get real use out of it, you have to hit the actual code path that are in a clearing system, a trade would travel in. So we have the capability in place to do this. And it's, when you measure availability through this sort of a scheme, you are not just looking at system uptime, but real availability according to the SLA, because you can measure correctness of the system as well as the latency SLAs. Are we going under latency SLAs or not? So all this coming in place. So LSEG has an accountability program on its own, which Chris mentioned, and we have at Millennium a process called Millennium Excellence, which is an annual audit that makes sure we are hitting the right metrics on quality aspects as well as delivery aspects, but just quality aspects. And at a team level, we have monthly engineering review that look at our engineering process, the quality of it, as well as how slick the process is. So there's always feedback to improve our process, and make sure those improvements actually make it in. And the most important part is building up a culture where quality is something that's not an afterthought. So the developers look at quality up front and have this culture build up in the team so that we are delivering software in an agile methodology, bringing in incremental product additions and delivering them with high quality. So the disciplines that you need to build up in terms of running a good continuous integration system and a continuous integration culture where people don't step on each other's feet and make sure that continuous delivery is supported, and that's built up inside the individuals themselves. So there's a lot of effort and training that goes into actually bringing up people in a way that they really fit in with the delivery machine we have in place. So with that, slide deck ends. I'll be happy to take in any questions.
Hi, great speech. I come from a development background, so I think ensuring quality at the source is something that goes a long way. You had mentioned the behavior-driven development. Are those executed at the unit level or component level? You know, it's acceptance criteria that can be executed. How are you executing those?
So right now, the acceptance criteria that we write is at an end-to-end level. So it's specifically targeting the user story that we are developing. So we try to keep all the user stories at a granularity where whatever we take into a sprint would be something that's end-to-end testable. So therefore, right now, at this moment, all our acceptance criteria would be at an end-to-end level.
Okay, and then also you had mentioned the dynamic code analysis that you run, I think through the nightly tests. Can you give a little more detail on what that dynamic code analysis consists of and how that works?
Well, so we use Valgrind to check, make sure that our code on C++ side, that our code is vulnerability free and we don't have leaks and all that. So what we've done is set up a component test and the end-to-end test battery to run on top of Valgrind. That doesn't happen every night. It's done at least once a week or on demand. So all the end-to-end tests that we do, component tests that we do, actually gives feedback through Valgrind to us on the quality of the code that we have written, how robust it is.
Very good. One kind of question, if I can. So that feedback that you get, is that on kind of the whole level, or do you also get feedback on the commit or source level of the changes that developers make?
That's a tough one. So right now it's at the whole product level. We have static analysis tools like Coverity running as well. So with that actually feeds back to you at an individual level, at a commit level. So if you've checked in code that has a potential vulnerability that's detected by static analysis, you would definitely get that email in your inbox next morning. But dynamic analysis running Valgrind, that's quite costly. And keeping that granularity is quite tough as well. So system.
All right, thank you very much.
I think I'm slightly over time. Oh.
Actually, my first question was exactly about static analysis, but you have partial answer on it. And another comment was about Valgrind. Do you have experience with next generation tools that was developed by Google, like address sanitizer, memory sanitizer, and other sanitizer like which try to make Valgrind-like checks better?
Wait. That's it. Yeah, okay. So we look at the whole like sanitizer family as well. So address sanitizer being at the top of the range. So given that address sanitizer gives us much faster feedback compared to Valgrind, there are cases we try out with address sanitizer, but we don't have that set up in continuous integration right now at least. But Valgrind has been the tool of preference given the coverage that it gives. The address sanitizer has limitations. It's fast, but the amount of coverage that we get out of it's not what we want right now.
Excuse me, and what do you mean by coverage?
In terms of the kind of vulnerabilities that address sanitizer catches and Valgrind catches. Thank you.